for him to introduce Garrett, and then he can do his musical parts that he's going to do while I do his PowerPoint. According to his abstract, Garrett Shields is a GIS production manager with Emmett Foster Wheeler. It says he specializes in hazard risk analysis, floodplain mapping, and advanced data processing. However, it looks like today he's going to get into talking about the role of big data, and I'm going to quote his bio a bit here because I can't really paraphrase it. He's going to show us how different methods of collecting data affects not only the information itself, but begins a chain of social, business, and technical interactions that ultimately changes the way we live our lives. So that's I think exactly what we were getting into with that last comments from Dr. Faber. So I think this is going to be really good, and let's welcome Garrett Shields.
Basically constantly providing information to corporations like Apple and Google and the internet giants is a perfect segue into kind of this matrix-like reality that we live in, known as the data network. And I'm going to do my best to kind of go through and guide you through what world we live in today and how we interact with all the data that's both available to us, the data that we actually create for companies or other people or ourselves, really impacts the way that we live our lives, and kind of get into the more ethical standpoint of this of, what we do with data, how we create it, how we interact with it. There's always a consequence, and there's always the other side of the argument. I work for a large private company, which means I'm a data cruncher. So if someone hands me data, I'm going to do something with it, and I will take in as much data as I can get because that is what I do. But where that data comes from, what I do with that data, and then what actually becomes of that data once it leaves me, really has an impact on everyone throughout the entire chain, from who the information is about and what the information impacts once we're to the point. So what we're going to get into really is what is the data network. And I chose this graphic because we're going to get kind of matrixy here. It surrounds us. The data network is everywhere. If you're connected to the Wi-Fi in this room right now, you are plugged into the data network, and you are creating data. So what it is basically it's an ever-expanding collection of information, which means that you're never going to have the end to how much data you can have. There was never really a beginning, and there never will be an end, because data has always been around. The network is evolutionary and revolutionary all at the same time. It's evolutionary in that as time and technology progresses, the amount of data that we can collect and process and utilize has increased exponentially over the course of history. Revolutionary in the fact that we really can't live without it anymore. We've gotten so plugged into the amount of data that we can see on a day-to-day basis that it really has changed the very fabric of how we live our lives. Who can live without GPS navigation? I kind of can, because I know how to get a sense of direction, but I'm still going to look up what something is. We live on social networking sites now. We live on Google. You really don't realize how much you plug into this and how much you're utilizing data until you really take a step back and look at it. And all this data is connected. It's interconnectable. It's relatable. In some way, shape, or form, there's no such thing as an unrelated data set. It can be something from way out in left field and something way out in right field, but there's a way that those two data points can be connected, and there's an interaction that occurs between those two. But what we'll get into kind of is the evolution of this network, and this is kind of where I get into the history lesson part of where we're at right now. So we started out way back, I guess, about 40 years ago I'm kidding, more than 40 years ago. So we started out way back in ancient times with oral tradition. This was the only way that ancient man had to convey information. They learned something, or they heard a story, they heard a fable or a myth, and they had to convey it to their children. And their children had to remember all that, and then they conveyed that information to their children. Sometimes it got altered throughout the way because you don't remember all the details, so some stuff got made up, and so on and so forth. Well, eventually somebody decided they couldn't remember all that anymore, so they had to start writing it down. So we came up with the written word. And over time, we developed more and more and more of this. And eventually we said, all right, we got to be able to put all this data together somehow. So we started developing books. And books evolved into encyclopedias. And you had this wealth of knowledge contained in what seemed to be a small package. Well, we got many more of those packages together. We ended up having to put them in something. We had to put them all together. So we had to come up with an analog filing system. How many people's office had one of these? How many people's office had like 10 of those? Did they open that big? So eventually people's offices started filling up. We didn't have enough room for all these filing cabinets. So a bunch of smart people out in California decided to move us into the digital age. And we moved into the digital media age. Technology progressed. We could take all that data that was being stored in analog systems, filing cabinets, libraries, so on and so forth, and we could condense them down to small pieces of hardware. And as time progressed, we could fit more and more and more data on smaller and smaller pieces of hardware. How many people's smartphones hold 16 gigs, 32 gigs, more than that? Did your first computer hold that much? How much was a gig of RAM back even 10 years ago? And now we've got hundreds of them in our pockets on our smartphones. And now the world is moving towards not even having to look at a piece of hardware anymore. Someone else can deal with it. Everything is stored up in the cloud. I can take my mobile device and go anywhere I want, and I can access information that I don't even have stored on my mobile device. And this is where things kind of get interesting. This is where the internet lives partially. And this is where the fabric of our lives is really being spent now, is on the cloud. We've got data floating around on different servers across the world. Sometimes we know where that data is, sometimes we don't. So the question is, if you don't know where that data is, you just know you can access it. What else is going on behind the scenes that we don't know about? And I'm not trying to sound paranoid, but this is how we interact with the data and how we move forward. So, as I said before, throughout history, with every new generation, we move forward and access to information becomes easier. It becomes faster. We're able to get in there and really do stuff with it. We now have gotten the ability to find information easier than we ever have before. Alright. Used to, when I was a kid, when you were a kid, your grandfather was a kid, you had a school project, you had a research report to do. You had to go somewhere, a building, they're called libraries. Still exists. Tell your kids about it. You had to go physically to a location, find the information you were looking for. Sometimes you could walk right into it. Sometimes it could take you hours to find that right book, find that encyclopedia, find the little article in there, and get the information you needed. And then you had to go get information from multiple sources. How many people's college professors wanted at least 20 sources? How many wanted 30? I mean, how long would it take in an analog world to find all that information? Now I can just pick up my phone and say, okay, Google, and see it just clicked. It blinked at me. It's not even on. It's listening to me right now. It's actually taking my information right now. So I can ask my smartphone, I can ask my tablet, who was the third Tsar of Russia? And it will give me a link to a full biography of him. And this is the type of interaction that we have today. We can fit so much information on such an infinitesimally small piece of hardware, and then we can query it just by asking. That was something that even as far as 10 years ago was completely unheard of. And it's really becoming more, it's becoming to where you don't even have to physically ask. I don't have to ask Google what is the weather in my hometown. It knows. I don't have to ask Google, if I have a package being shipped to my house, when it's going to get there. It just goes on and tells me without me asking. this type of predictive analytics is getting to where we won't eventually be able to ask questions because we don't have to. And the capacity that was needed to store all this has greatly increased the ability that we have to access that information. So, kind of got a little graphic, you know. This is where you had to search for information 10, 15 years ago. Whose library looked like that? How long did it take you to find books in a cathedral of knowledge like that? And then now we move into, we can ask our watch. We have watches now to connect to your smartphone or connect to your computer, and all that information can be displayed right on your wrist. You don't have to lug around a computer or a laptop. You just look at your wrist and ask what time it is. So, kind of a segue into this. It's not necessarily what is governing all of this, but it's an interesting piece of theory. Moore's Law. Have you ever heard of Moore's Law? Now, for those that haven't, it was first theorized by Gordon Moore. He was a co-founder of Intel. He theorized this in 1975. This is not like it's not a law of physics. It's not a scientifically accepted law. It's mainly it's a social and technological prediction that Gordon Moore had that basically, in a nutshell, stated that every 2 years, the amount of transistors that you could get onto a microchip would double, which basically means that computing power would double every 2 years. And a lot of people have theorized that we've actually already broken the period of time that Moore suggested this would take place. And the computing power has gotten to where it's exceeding cost. The thought was that as technology progressed, the cost to produce technology would reduce, and the advances in technology will allow us to keep moving into the future. The same could also be said for storage capacity, kind of a similar segue. Over the years, the amount of stores that we've been able to purchase and we have access to is greatly increased. Now, you know, this is the 16 gig flash drive that my presentation was set on. The 16 gig flash drive can hold approximately 53,334 textbooks. How many had that many books in their local public library? How many people have ever seen 53,000 textbooks? The amount of money that it would take to purchase this is about $20 nowadays. $20, and I can hold half the Library of Congress in text form in my pocket. And this is just consumer technology. The amount of storage that a lot of the internet giants and the cloud computing companies have, it's beyond exponential. Beyond this, we're talking not just terabytes, but petaflop. You ever heard of a petaflop? It's a cluster of petabytes. We're talking servers as big as a building full of information. And it's information about every single one of us, everyone we know, everyone they know, and who they're thinking about having a baby with, what their baby's name is going to be, and so on and so forth. So moving on in the future, we go into adding connections. So how do we actually interact with this network? How can we, as geospatial professionals, create data into the network? A lot of us have gone through life the easy way. We go out and we're told we need to collect this data because we need to create a database so we can make a map. So we go out and collect data either in the field, or we research it, we get it from our peers, so on and so forth. We get that data, we process it, we produce the product we're going to have, and we send it out to either our peers or clients, and so on and so forth. There's another way that you can get information. It's always been around, but it's really picking up steam nowadays, and that's also crowdsourcing. We'll talk a little bit about each of these moving forward. So the first one is mobile data collection. So this has always been a thing. You've always been able to go out and collect data in the field, but technology has regressed nowadays to where it's so much easier to collect data outside of a static environment. And that's where I define mobile data collections. Anything outside of a static environment. And we can use this by using laptops, GPS units, smartphones, so on and so forth. We can do all that to collect data in the field. We can also still use analog methods. There's still nothing wrong with going up and asking someone a question. Please continue to do this because we need to talk to each other. I need to go up to you. I need to ask you a question. You need to provide me information, and I need to take that back with me. Those are methods that we collect data from. The reason that mobile collection is is so good is that when you go out into the field, when you gather information, you're interacting with the public, you're interacting with your peers. There's a much greater likelihood that if you go out in the field to collect land data or collect site locations, you're going to run into a consumer, you're going to run into a landowner, or just a concerned citizen, and you're going to have a chance to interact with that person and to tell them, explain to them what you're doing, what that data is going to be used for. They might actually have some insightful information to give you that you wouldn't otherwise know just by going out there. If you're surveying someone's property and they come up and say, well, you know, about 10 years ago there used to be a building right here and there's a known elevation marker on a rock over there, you didn't know that, but that person is going to told you that. So you've had an interaction with somebody that's giving you a piece of information. This is the most hands-on form of gathering information. So you're always going to be interacting with the data because it's yours. You're the one actually out there collecting the data, so you're responsible for how you're going about it. So crowdsourcing. This is where we really get into the exciting world of data collection, also the scary world of data collection, and what goes on in the data network. Crowdsourcing has always been around. It's when we go out and we collect information from the general public. We may know the people we're collecting the information from, we may not know the information. How many have ever got a telephone call from someone wanting you to do a survey for anything? It's annoying, right? Well, that is an analog method of data collection and crowdsourcing. They don't know who you are. They're calling going to ask you some questions so they can get some data from you, get information from you. They're going to poll that from a whole bunch of people, and they're going to come up with some useful statistics for whatever the heck they're selling, or politician they're lobbying for, or whatever. But the way that crowdsourcing is working nowadays, it's become kind of a new phenomenon. The amount of data that you can actually source from the general public has greatly increased. And the really scary part about it is you can get that data from the general public and they don't ever have to know it. You can pull all sorts of information from the internet that no one has to know about. Some of it might be completely harmless data. One of the easiest things to crowdsource is locations of where people are. You know, people use Google all the time. There's apps that Google has where you can look and see where all of your friends are located. So you can go and find them when you're close, and you can talk to them and say, hey, I'm 2 blocks down from you if you want to go get a drink. Well, you can also do that for people who you don't know. And you can find out where people are. There's technology that actually exists out there that can track people's movements using internal Wi-Fi. It's anonymous. You're just tracking a point in space. But it exists. You're crowdsourcing information, and someone walking around a room with their cell phone in their pocket doesn't know that there's data being gathered from their device. When you visit a web page, when you shop online, you know, when you answer your email, you have something shipped to you. Every time you access the internet, you're providing data, and all of us are providing that kind of data to whoever's collecting it. And it's mostly harmless data, but it's data nonetheless. So it's a lot of times we can get all this from social media, Facebook, Twitter, Google Plus, all that. They're great avenues for collecting data. The easiest way is to go online, find all your friends, and ask them a question. I asked a question a few weeks ago, which would be better for me to get Netflix or Amazon Prime? And I got like 50 people giving me their opinion. I just crowdsourced some data. I had some information that I could then take back and use to my own advantage. And it was to their knowledge. We also get this information from news. We get it from reading reviews. You know, if you go out and you're looking for a new restaurant and you're going to go read the reviews on that restaurant, that's crowdsourced information. The number of stars that a restaurant is rated, the information about that restaurant, that's all crowdsourced information. No one had to pay for that. It was just freely provided by the public. So everybody goes out and they tweet, they give their status reports on Facebook, and we all know everything about any facet of everyone's life because of what they put on the internet. So there are some pros to crowdsourcing. There's pros and cons. You know, some of the positive parts about it is it's popular and it's free and it's easy. A lot of it is harmless, how we collect that data. A lot of times you can get responses simply and quickly. A lot of times crowdsourced information can actually do some good. You can initiate really positive discussions and some ideological discussions with people based on information that you're asking them for on the internet. You could ask a simple question or create a survey or create a poll online about some form of social or political or theological or ideological issue going on. And you can actually, while you're probably going to get a lot of trolls and people giving you their unsolicited opinion, you could also initiate really good and positive feedback and a good social interaction that can really promote some ideas from that information. Using crowdsourcing also is very innovative. How we gather information from people is going to evolve through time. We're going to find better ways to talk to more people over time. We're going to get more information from everybody. And ultimately, this actually can be used to save lives. A lot of the work I do deals with emergency management and hazard risk assessment. And one of the things that the state has been looking into, and something we've been kind of helping them out with, is a way to use tweets and 911 calls to actually predict trajectories or actually plot out tornado paths and areas of destruction from natural hazards. Somebody sends up a 911 call and says, hey, a tree just fell on my house. Well, there was a tornado warning. The tornado was on the ground. If you can plot out, a bunch of 911 calls in the general area, you can get an idea where that tornado was on the ground well before the National Weather Service provides, an actual path for that storm. And it's, in a sense, you can get in and find out, all right, where is there damage? Where could people be hurt? And we get in there and get them quickly. So there are some positive aspects to that. Negative, on the other side, a lot of times crowdsourced information is hard to validate. We're living in our world, where everything that we produce, all the data that we deal with, we need to be able to have some form of accountability. We need to be able to validate the accuracy of the information we use. I can't go make a map or produce a database with just random data with no accuracy standards or nothing. I live in a world of strict accuracy standards, so I need to be able to validate all the data that I get in. It's the everyone's an expert kind of thing. You ask a question online, and everybody's going to give you their opinion, and they are an expert in that field. They know exactly what you're talking about and know it better than you. Probably not, maybe so. We don't know. So it's a lot of times can be based on opinion. And the other thing, like we're talking about with tracking people on Wi-Fi, some people would call that a privacy violation. Might be. Do we need to know when you walk into the bathroom? Probably not. It's not statistically relevant. So whatever you're doing is, in that information being pulled from you, if you're not aware of it, there's things to consider with that. So all this pulls together on how we interact with the data network. The thing to pull out, the big point to pull out of this is the same point that Dr. Faber was talking about, that we are creating data every minute of every day. Just by owning a smartphone or having some device connected to the internet, we are interacting with this data network all day long, every day, whether we want to or not. And the only way to not do it is to just completely turn off the way you live and go back to the Stone Age. Most of us aren't really prepared to do that and have no desire to do that. So we have to live with certain aspects of the lives that we've created. We interact a lot now through smartphones and tablets. We use search engines, maps, and navigation. We're always on social media. We're connected to Wi-Fi hotspots. We browse web pages. All of this is creating data, either statistical data, content-related data, so on and so forth, that can be used either to better our lives, provide us new products, or to spy on us, too, depending on what your view is. Does the government need to know what we're shopping for on Amazon? Maybe, maybe not. Who knows? It's worth the discussion. So this is kind of where I wanted to go. The main point of this presentation was the fact that there really isn't such thing as an unrelated data set. Data produced way out over here can be in some way, shape, or form used to create data and information way over here at 2 points that seem completely unrelated. So the question we have to ask, and if you're a social media person, you'll know what I'm talking about here. Can a hashtag become useful data? What's the harm in a hashtag? Nothing, is it? Well, basically what a hashtag is, for those not savvy in social media, a hashtag is basically a searchable symbol. So for all those live tweeting for the GIS conference, the conference has a hashtag. It's hashtag NCGIS 2015. So I can search on the internet for everything with that hashtag marker. I can click on it. It's going to bring up every tweet related to the GIS conference if someone put it in their message. Now that tweet could have a location based on it. It could have information saved in the tweet itself. The message could have attributes, and I'll show you an example. What we can look at is using a geovisualization algorithm. A colleague of mine did a presentation a few months ago at the North Carolina Arc Users Conference for geovisualizing Twitter messages, basically. And not so much using the geocode, using their location based on the spatial location for where the tweet was sent out, but actually where on the earth that message was referenced. I could tweet something right now from Raleigh and be talking about West Palm Beach, Florida. There's software out there that could actually pinpoint that point on the map with relative accuracy that I'm talking about West Palm Beach, Florida. And I'll show you an example. So this is a Twitter message that I sent out a couple days ago when we had the first round of snow. I live down in Fuquay area. So I tweeted that we had about an inch of snow and the snow was still falling down in Fuquay. And I gave it two hashtags. One hashtag NCWX, which is the North Carolina hashtag for winter weather, and then hashtag Quant. That was the winter storm name, the first storm you're keeping track of this week. It kind of all ran together for me. But the first one was called Winter Storm Quant. So what I've created here is a piece of information that's indexed and searchable and has useful information in it. So what I can do, if me along with enough people in the world start tweeting very similar information, where they are, what they're talking about, how much snow fell, and reference it based on a certain tag, based on a certain hashtag or searchable spot, I can actually get useful data from all this. I can pull all that information together. I can use specialized software and specialized algorithms. There's a lot of people tweeting about snow right now. A lot of people. And I can actually take that, and in theory, I could create a useful map with some unofficial snowfall totals for the state, based on however many tweets and however many messages were out there. This is useful. This is data that you can pull from the internet. It's not doing any harm. It's actually going towards a worthy cause. It's going to measure snowfall totals. This can be useful for anybody. Anyone who just wants to know how many snowmen they can go out and make, or for emergency managers who need to know how much snow is on the ground, how many DOT trucks do we need to have out there, how long is it going to take to move, and so on and so forth. Having that data, along with so many other different things that you can pull from social media, is useful. And this is actually extremely possible. There's software out there that exists right now that can do this. The downside, you're pulling tweets from people who don't know that information's been gathered. Now, what is the content of their information? We're kind of getting into the gray area now of, all right, what did they put on the internet? Is it useful? Is it your information to use? Is it public data? Is it private data? We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. So we'll keep going. So we'll get into a little bit of data tracking. Part of the data network is not only how we create data, interact with it, but how we go about and track things. Using the analytics, a lot of companies are doing this to produce information based on statistical analysis of data they produce. I talk about the Walmart effect here. Walmart is way smarter than any of us actually thought. It's not just a discount store. It sells everything you could possibly imagine except for the one thing which you didn't buy that day that they're out of. They use statistical analytics to actually tell you they have tracking software that tracks the number of certain types of vehicles that are in the parking lot at any given point of the day. If they see a lot of minivans in the parking lot at 3 p.m., the statistical analytics say we should probably go and put out more diapers and baby food. If they see a lot of lifted trucks with dual exhaust, they say, all right, let's put a sale on bullets. You know, it's going to be stuff that helps them sell products. And they use statistics. We can also track stuff using usernames and passwords and browsing history on the internet. And it kind of gets into the gray area as we move forward of what really is public and private data. There's a really big blurry line between that, especially when it comes to the data we put out on the internet. And we have to understand as we create data, as professionals, as we are analyzing that data and interacting with it, how do we go about respecting that person's, and you know, we all use Street View, perfect example. Some people might not want you to know what color their house is, how many stories it is, how many doors there are, and all that. That information can be very useful for good reasons, but it could also be very useful for some not so good reasons. You know, and I can go and look at anything about anyone's house. I can go and do a 360 of someone's house and bang, see what's hiding in their backyard. I don't ever have to go to visit them. I can see what someone's house looks like without ever being there. So is that public data? Is the contents of someone's backyard their own personal business? You know, who's to say it's public or private? What is the difference between big data and Big Brother? And we have to understand this, and it's a really gray area that's harder and harder to understand these days. So the big question is, what goes too far? You know, like I said before, I'm a big data cruncher. I will take in as much data as you can give me, and I will turn it into something. Well, what's the limit to that? And that's something that I have to answer, a question that I have to answer almost daily in what I do, especially since I deal with a lot of public data, such as land records and so on. We have to respect that data. We have to respect the amount of information that we get in and what we turn back around and publish back to the general public. What is the limit of what should be liable? So the question, we have to balance that kind of gap. We also have to wonder who really owns the data. You post a picture on Facebook, you send out a message on Twitter, do you actually own the content? Facebook says you don't. Someone else says you might. I say you do. The law says something completely different. So that's the kind of thing that you have to worry about. Keep going. So yeah, what is the data being used for? That's the other question we have to be able to ask, or we have to be able to answer when someone asks that question. Is, okay, you took my picture, you took my tweet, you took all this information, what are you going to use it for? That's the ethical question that we have to be able to produce an answer for. This is the best one so far. What is, and had a perfect segue with the Patriot Act, what is a matter of public or national security? You know, when we're collecting data about people, we're having our phone records tapped, or we're having our Wi-Fi zones mapped, and it's under the auspices of national security. What does that mean? What does it mean for the everyday person? And as a lot of us may be in the private contracting world or know people in the private world who are helping out this process, because that's their job. What goes too far? You're talking about this. We have to have accountability, and this is the next one here is really the thing that as spatial professionals we have to be able to produce on everything that we do. This is the key to saving your soul. It's annoying, it's time consuming, but this is the way that you can, with a clear conscience, produce and send out data to anyone and everyone, is if you document what you're doing with proper metadata. Because metadata explains where you got data from, what its relevancy is, and what it's being used to do. I don't care how insignificant the data set is, metadata will set you free. I'm not saying that the data that you produce might not be too much for someone, but having the metadata created, especially in our profession, is key. I'm not allowed to use any data for any project that I work on for a local or federal government agency without being able to provide metadata for it, because they want to know where that information came from. and how accurate it is and how relevant it is. So the final takeaway, because I've been rambling for way too long, is the data network is vast. Should we be afraid of it? No. Wander away. Feel free to immerse yourself in the technology and the information that's provided. There's a reason that it's called the information age, right? There are some scary parts. There are some things that we're not quite sure about. We're not sure what's right and what's wrong. But the overall takeaway to all this is that there's so much information at our fingertips. It's a shame not to use it. It actually, 99% of the time, makes our lives better. And it provides us with things that we wouldn't have otherwise had, information that we wouldn't have otherwise had, or had at such an ease of access. We do have to worry about respecting privacy. And as people who use and create information a lot, we have the responsibility to advocate for those who we're producing data from. So if I'm collecting land records or records from social media to produce useful items, I still have to be able to advocate and understand the sensitivity of the data that I use, and understand that there are people out there who would probably not be comfortable with the information that I'm collecting. So you have to be able to advocate for them, understand the other side of the argument. Don't just be a data hoarder and not care about the consequences of where that data came from or where it's being used. And by doing that, you can ensure reliability. You can ensure that the data that you produce is being reliable, it's relevant, and it's being used for a worthy cause. I think that's it. Questions?
I have two questions.
Okay.
What is the software used for mapping Twitter information?
There's different algorithms that are out there. One of them, I believe, is called, I think it's called Clavin. One of our developers has been playing with it. I'm not a developer, so talking about what's kind of like speaking Greek for me. But there is an application, and I think it's a coding platform called Clavin, and it will pull. It uses an algorithm to pull attributes from within, like a Twitter message or something from social media, to try to geolocate that, not just by the triangulated location where you were when you made the message, but if I say Fuquay Arena, then it would know, drop a point in Fuquay Arena. If I said, Washington, D.C., drop a point in Washington, D.C. I might have been in Seattle when I made that location, when I made that message, but it knows where to go, and it's theoretically possible to pull additional information from a message on social media, like a snowball total, or if you know how to parse it out, you can get in and actually analyze the content of the message. And this is not a plug for us, but I know our developers here, and she would know a lot more about it. If you come by our booth later, she can talk to you more about it. We're not using it as a product in our company, but it's really just something that we're looking into just because it's interesting.
The other question is, you mentioned Wi-Fi zone mapping. What is that?
It's something that actually Google got in trouble for a couple of years ago with their street view cars, and it's something that's being used actively, whether we like it or not, by other agencies. Is actually Google got in trouble because they were using their street view vehicles going up and down the streets collecting imagery, but at the same time they were also mapping people's home Wi-Fi networks. They were mapping they said not the username and passwords, but they were mapping the actual networks and the extent of those networks. So how far out did that Wi-Fi zone reach? And they were looking to see how much of their coverage was, how much of the landmass that they're driving through is covered by some form of a wireless network, so some connection to the internet. And Google's not the only one that's doing it. I'm convinced. I think they were just the only ones that got caught. They were using it for consumer purposes, basically to help. I think they used the same reason they always use it was for advertising purposes, to know who has internet, who doesn't have home internet, just to know. But there's other sources that would say that people were actually gathering your Wi-Fi passwords and all that, and it's being used where someone can hack your Wi-Fi network. Whether you believe that or not, I'm not sure. It's been a concern, I know, for gathering Wi-Fi. It's a problem where do you really want someone standing in your backyard or in the road behind your house saying, "Oh, they've got Wi-Fi"? You know, it's kind of a gray area. And is your Wi-Fi network really yours?
I actually didn't have a problem with somebody using my Wi-Fi. My neighbor was using it. I have no problem with that. But what do you think is the security in that case? Those kind of things. For intelligent
Intelligence gathering and whatnot. I mean, I can't speak so much on the intelligence platform, but in theory, I mean, if the government suspected that there was some form of nefarious activity going on in the location, and they knew that that person or group of people were communicating via the internet, if they knew the extent of whether they were using Wi-Fi or using a landline, they knew the extent of that network or how much access to the internet they had, you know, that could be used to help a national security type situation. It's kind of the same. It's kind of along the same lines as wiretapping your phone without your knowledge. If you can tap into someone's Wi-Fi network, you can see what they're looking at on the internet. You can see what they've been browsing, what they've been shopping for, who they've been talking to, all that kind of thing. So, you know, I'm kind of like you. I don't really care if someone uses my Wi-Fi network, but I know it's my neighbor. I trust them. They're not doing anything illegal. But it's the ability to have someone look at what you've been doing on the internet. That's kind of the scarier part.
Any other questions?
What's your take on policies of companies, service providers, information sharing?
Speaking personally, I think you're right. It really kind of is a drop in the bucket. I mean, limiting the amount of information that you can give out, my own personal opinion is that's kind of against the Bill of Rights. I think I should be allowed to distribute any information I want. It's no freedom of the press. But at the same, on the other side of that, it's the cell phone companies that the data networks that you're using. So they would argue that it's their data network, it's their cell phone that they provided to you, so they should have some form of control over what you're doing because you're paying them to use it. So there's kind of that personal use versus the commercial use that you have to kind of look at either side of the argument. Anything else? Most of the way.
All right, let's give
They're setting up refreshments out there, so.
let's give both our speakers another round of applause.